we've been talking about the different types of combative principles. There's principles of motion, power, structure, and strategy, which you guys are already familiar with. Today I want to talk about how you can put this knowledge to work for you, how you can use it to better understand and identify the lessons that are contained within your self-defense techniques. And perhaps you've had this experience. I've seen several students have it. You've learned a technique. You know the lessons. Maybe it's a technique that you learned a long time ago, maybe years ago, and you go back to identify the lessons. And sure, you can identify several of them, but you have a difficult time pulling out all the lessons that you've learned. So that's where this is going to come in. Knowledge of the different types of principles is going to help you be better able to accomplish that. But then the next thing, this is more important. Many of you guys are becoming higher belts now. I have several higher belts here. I want you to be in a position where you can move forward on your own. I want you to be able to explore your techniques and identify additional lessons beyond just what I've taught you, because it's much more powerful if you can start identifying the lessons on your own. So the key to that, the key to moving forward with your understanding is oftentimes knowing the right questions to ask. So today, I want to give you guys a few, actually 4 major fundamental questions that you can ask just to get started. And these questions are just the beginning. Then on your own, I want you to go through and try to come up with some other questions. These are just the starting point, and we're going to use the knowledge of these different types of principles to help us develop our questions. Now, there are 2 preliminary questions before we get started that set the stage. Remember, we're looking at self-defense techniques. So when you're exploring your self-defense techniques, the first preliminary question is, what's the nature of the attack? And then the next question, what's the nature of the defense? See, these 2 questions really serve as a reminder for you. Don't just look at your techniques. The questions that I'm going to give you as you're looking at your techniques, don't just use them from one perspective. Don't just look at your defense. You have to understand what's going on with the attack as well. That helps you better understand why you're doing the things you're doing within your defense. And of course this, to discover this, that involves understanding principles. So that's where our principles come in. So what's the first question? Well, we're going to start at the top of our list here. What's our first type of principles? Principles of motion. We should be learning movements that help us better expand our understanding of the possibilities of motion. Okay, you're learning how to describe motion, you're exploring motion, and this is a critical first step, because if you want to develop greater command over motion, of course you've heard me say it, you have to have a good understanding of the possibilities of motion that exist. So the first thing that you can look at when you learn a technique, first question you can ask, what are the moves? What are the moves or movements within your technique? What moves are you dealing with regards to the attack? And what movements are you using to respond to that attack? And now there's 2 additional sort of sub-questions that are built within this. To really understand the movements of your technique, I want you to also ask this. Are there new moves? Part of the benefit of these questions is that you'll better understand why you're learning the techniques that you're learning. And so sometimes a technique is designed to introduce you to new movements, to new vocabulary of motion. So are there new moves? If there are, identify them. And try to understand the benefit that they provide, the value that they offer. But then the next question, are there old moves that are being used in a new way? This question actually, both of these questions, force you to look at your other techniques. Your techniques are not designed to be learned in isolation of one another. You should be working to establish connections that exist between your techniques, because understanding the connections that exist, understanding perhaps the versatility of your movements, that's going to make the lessons that you're learning from your techniques much more powerful. So these are important questions. And don't forget, look at the attack and the defense. Perhaps you're dealing with a new attack, but perhaps you're dealing with an attack you've seen before, but it might be subtly different. So that's valuable to acknowledge as well. So there's our first question. Our second question, we're going to look at power. Understanding how to move is the first step. Understanding how to move with power, that's the next piece of the puzzle. So the next question is, where is the power coming from? Now, we want to understand where our opponent's power is coming from as well, because then we'll be in a better position to neutralize it, neutralize their attack. When we look at our movements, when we look at how we're manifesting power, there's another question that goes along with this, another sub-question for you. And that is, are there alternate methods? This is important because we're all individuals. And based on the varying body types, there are methods which might be more optimal for you to employ. So you need to be aware of any alternate methods that exist. You need to explore those. Very important. But when we're looking at how to manifest power, there's something else that goes along with this. That's our next category of principles. That's structure. Now, sometimes we'll look at structure in isolation of power, but we can't look at power in isolation of structure because we need to have a good sound base. We need to have a stable base that allows us to deliver power. So where's the power coming from almost immediately implies where is the structure coming from? Where's the structure of your technique, the structure of your punch, your stance, your block? This is also key to understanding how to neutralize your opponent's attack, because if you can take away their structure, if you can take away their base, they're not going to be able to deliver any power. And if you can understand how to optimally position yourself so that you're delivering your technique from a position of structure and power, while at the same time canceling off your opponent's power, that is a very valuable lesson. So where's the structure coming from within the technique? Now, there's one final question I'm going to give you, and you've probably guessed what it is. We're making our way right down this list, so the next thing we're looking at is strategy. And so we want to know what strategies are being employed. But we want to know of course, what strategies our opponent is employing and what strategies we're being taught within the technique, because we should be trying to employ a strategy that's perhaps more effective than our opponent's. But the really important thing to understand here in identifying the strategies is that you can't deliver a powerful movement. You can have a sound structure that allows you to deliver powerful moves, but if you don't employ good sound strategy, those movements are useless. You can have the most powerful strike in the world. If you can't land it, it's not valuable. If your opponent blocks every strike that you deliver or evades every strike, it's worthless. So we have to understand strategy, and very often our techniques are teaching us new strategies. So these are the 4 questions just to get you started. Again, I want you to move forward with this. I want you to try to come up with some of your own questions, because the more questions that you can come up with, the more questions that you ask, the more answers you're going to find.